Hello and namaste everyone. Welcome to the discussion series organized by the Kathmandu University Nepal Center for Contemporary Studies, KU-NCCS, and KU-NCCS organizes discussion series on contemporary issues, and today we are discussing on the topic of shrinking civic space in South Asia. And my name is Chet Narayan Rasaili, and we are joined by some scholars from other South Asian countries. We have Dr. Shafi Muhammad Mostofa from Bangladesh. He is an associate professor at the University of Dhaka. And then we have Yogaraja from Sri Lanka. She is a peace builder and a defense analyst in Sri Lanka. And then I'm also joined by Ananya Sharma, who is a development professional. So today we will be discussing on various issues, but mostly focusing on the issues of shrinking civic space in South Asia, and especially about three countries, which is Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. All of these countries actually emerged recently from youth-led protests. And then another thing is that all these countries have also now, the protests, they were actually able to break down the regime, and then there were regime changes, and after the regime changes there were elections and there are new governments. We have some similar context in the recent years, but the root causes were different, and the changes have also, I think, because we are from different countries, so there may be different contexts as well. But we will be today discussing on the issues, especially focusing on civic space. So why don't we start with Bangladesh, that because I remember the election was recently held in February, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So it is relatively a new government, but the protest was relatively a bit earlier than us. So I just wanted to understand about the context, that how it is now, how it was after the protest, and actually after this election.
Um, Thank you very much, Chet. And also, I thank Nepal Center for Contemporary Studies for inviting us to this podcast. Uh, Having said that, yes, we recently in last February we had the 10th national parliamentary elections, and but this is a very I would say we have been in the under the authoritarian regime last 17 years, and then the July Revolution came in that rescued us from that long authoritarian regime, and finally we got a democratically elected government in place. So definitely this is a relief for us that we're in the democratic journey. We are on the path to restore, to get over the authoritarian recessions in the past 17 years. Yes, having said that, uh, yes, we are still having issues to overcome the authoritarian legacies in terms of especially our country currently having serious issues with ensuring the security because it was the Bangladesh police that suffered a lot because they faced the crisis of the moral crisis, because the police was one of the tools of the Hasida regime, and they controlled by force the dissents. So even during the revolution, the police was heavily used on the students, and over 1,500 students were killed. So you can understand the gravity of the problem. So vice versa, the police has also been affected. Their stations were also burned down. So this is the force that has the both moral crisis, and also it has the actual lack of the capability. So I think as we have got now the democratically elected government, hopefully this government will focus on that area and will be able to ensure the safety and security for the citizens. This is the one side. The other side is that yes, after an initial challenges, we're now having good relations with again with the external world, and hopefully the economy will function very well. And then I think it's very early to comment on the performance of the current government, but I think we need to give some time to comment on their performance. Yeah.
Thanks, Safi. Yeah, it indeed is good to know about the fall of an authoritarian regime that had been holding the government for so long. As we have also another speaker from Bangladesh, so I would just like to, ask about the context as Safi rightly mentioned about the fall of the government, about the protest, and about how it was led by youth, and also the brutality of then government. But I would be happy, if you could elaborate a little on the context that what were actually the root causes of the protest. I mean, how the youths actually came to the street and how it actually happened. So, I would be really happy to know more about that. Yeah.
So, if we look back, like how it started, why young people get uh, engaged there. So it was, in one word, it was the quota reformation issue. So what was that? It was an issue of government jobs. In government jobs, back in 2018, government just abolished all the quota, but after 2018, in 2024, the High Court again reinstated the quota system, like 30% for the freedom fighters quota. And at that point, most of the young people, they started protesting because in our country, in Bangladesh, the young population is most in our country. And if you see the unemployment rate, out of 5 unemployed people, 4 are youth. So, and because of demographic dividend, they are the force at present. So they saw that they have become victim of this quota system. So they started protesting for this quota movement. And when they started the protesting for the quota movement, they have been brutally attacked by the force, by the military, by the police. So when it became mass killing of students, mass people joined, the civil society joined in that movement. So that's how this movement like started from the quota reformation. Then it hit upon on the student attack, students been killed, and then it shifted to the fall of authoritarian regime. That's how it's went, the movement.
Thanks a lot, Ananya, for actually bringing out the real issue. We have another speaker from Sri Lanka, and the context, while I was describing about the youth-led Gen Z protest in all these three countries, Sri Lanka is the first one which actually started, and then it was in Bangladesh, and then it came to Nepal as well. I would be really happy to know the similar context that why, the movement in Sri Lanka, it was started. If I'm not mispronouncing, it was Aragale known as the movement. So I would be really happy to know about, and then we'll be discussing more about the context that it has actually brought to us. But yeah, we'll be really happy to know more.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting us for this wonderful podcast session. And as you correctly mentioned, Aragalia is actually called the struggle in Sinhala. So it was a struggle of people fighting for their basic necessities. We did not have, electricity. We did not have fuel for travel. We did not even have enough wages to afford a lot of things that was our daily necessary items. So this was all because of poor policies and bad economic mismanagements that was led by the then government. And this was actually considered enough is enough. And the people wanted to challenge the government. So they took to the protests, to the streets, because they wanted to have all of these answers to their questions as to why we are having these grievances. And this started in April 2022. And we actually led a successful protest zone, which was called the Gota Go Gama, which was a village that was created for the protesters. So we made a public space out of a shrinking, space for no democracy. We made a permanent or a temporary stage at that time where people could join from different parts of Sri Lanka, and they were stationed there until we were given a solution to all our problems. And it led very successfully, as the main goal of it was to make the president the incumbent president to resign so that we can elect a different president who would be responsible, who would take accountability, who would address the needs of the people at that time. So they successfully were able to achieve their motive, and we were able to get out of that bad economic stage to a good flourishing economic stage presently that we are going through right now.
That's great. I mean, the common thing that I actually can bring through all the experience of this country is that after these all protests, we have now elected governments. Recently in Nepal as well. I mean, we also went through the similar situation. There was the youth movement, I mean, led by Gen Zs, known as the Gen Z protest in Nepal. I mean, the protest was actually started as an anti-corruption movement, but it had actually been fueled with the grievances of the people that had been in the mind of people for so long due to the political failure of the previous government. I mean, that's why, I mean, the good thing is that now we have now elected governments. But the thing that we need now to think about is what reforms these all are bringing. What I can sense, as you rightly mentioned about the both countries, like the main agenda must have been also the reform of the country, reform from various aspects. So I just want to understand about, I mean, how the reform processes are going on, and also from the prospect of improving more civic space. Like, I would say that our civic space, especially in South Asia, was in a good situation, but I mean, not very good situation. For an example, I had recently seen the report of Civicus Monitor, which I don't really second, but at least they have scored our countries, and unfortunately, I could see that Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, both of them are scored as repressed, especially in the context of civic space. And Nepal civic space is also obstructed. If I'm not wrong, their recent report scores Nepal as the 48th, and then 40th Sri Lanka, and 29th Bangladesh. The below is the worst in ranking. In that context, I mean, we are not improving a lot even after these movements. I mean, all these are reports of 2025, and then we can see that this has not improved much. And in that context, I just want to understand that how it's going on, especially in the context of civic space and also reforming it. I mean, how is the situation of freedom of assembly? How is the situation of freedom of expression? How is the situation of freedom of organization, freedom of peaceful assembly? That's what we consider as the wider array of civic space. Safi,
Oh,
I come back to you. Yeah.
so that's a very difficult question. In order to answer and 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 justify, make a justification towards the ranking given in that ranking you mentioned. So the problem is, in order to understand the civic space first, you have to understand the context of the country we have passed through. The context is there was only one political party functioning, and then movement or revolution came in. So it changed the previous status quo. And Bangladesh is the only country, maybe in the globe, where after the revolution, I call it, people call it uprising, I call it revolution, because this is the only country, probably in the across the globe, that where after the movement, the prime minister, all the ministers, all the parliamentarians, including the chief justice, including the religious leader like the imam of the central mosque, they all left, they all fled the country. So while why I'm saying that, you have to understand the gravity. And if you look at how many students were killed by that repressive Hasina regime, the number is more than 1,500. And if you look at the how many students were injured, that number, I can't tell you the exact number, but that number is also so huge. Having said that, while the whole structure of the state was affected, so definitely the state was not in a position to give security. That's what I was mentioning, to give security, to protect to some extent the individual interest on minority rights. I don't call it, it was a very any party's policy to attack the minorities, but I would rather put it in that way that that the individual vested interest worked because the surveillance system has been broken. So if you consider that this is the failure of the state, because the state was in transitional phase, so I don't consider that's the failure of the state, because the state didn't have that apparatus to bring everything in order. So from that perspective, it's looked like that the civic space was shrinking. Yes, we had a lot of mob incidences. Again, the state did not have the enough capacity to control them. But slowly, as we have now got the elected government, the police is getting back their moral legitimacy and the capacity too. So I hope slowly the situation will be increased. But yes, still there are issues, and it is a long way to go to maintain the stability, the political stability, the economic stability, as well as to bring and to counter the social integrity as well. So all these things, if government, because it's just few months, so I do not want to put any sort of label on them, whether they are failure or this is a success story. I'm still observing them very closely, but at least on one point, I I put it Professor Asif Bayat's lens, that the changing revolutions are kind of revolutions. We call it's a blend of reform and the revolution. So yes, the Genjis, they have a different sort of to look at the world. I mean, they want equal partnership everywhere. So that sort of, even the reform agenda was formulated. Unfortunately, the current government, maybe they have their own way to do some sort of reformation, but definitely that initial uh, reformation agenda has been stuck by the current government, and I can clearly see that might cause another wave of frustration among the Genjis. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, truly contextual to understand that, because it's new and then the government is relatively new and a lot of things need to be watched. I mean, the real context that we are actually speaking about is the reform. I think every revolution actually,
It's a reformations,
exactly, that happens for reformation, and in the blending of the word, I really like that.
revolutions.
Yeah, I'm really, I mean, the main thing that we really need to understand is why revolution, because there is reformation needed. So when we see it from civic space lens, I think it is very important for us to understand that where we were and where the country is heading towards. That's the situation.
Yep.
I mean, I would not say, I mean, I'm not trying to second the idea or the report of any organization, but it was the situation like it. I'm not telling that the situation of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Nepal was very better before, or the report is telling that it is getting worse now. The situation is where we are heading towards. Is it really improving or not? So that's the context actually we need to figure out, because we really need to have a democracy lively in our context where civic space is much enjoyed by the people. What is the context of Sri Lanka? Yeah, would be happy to know more about, especially in the context of reformation and civic space. I mean, you can bring any context like peaceful assembly, like what is the situation. If I was not wrong, there was also issue of internet shutdown a few years back, if I was not wrong. So, I mean, how is the situation now?
Thank you so much for that. There's a very popular phrase that I would always quote about democracy is not a game for spectators. It has to be actively participated by the people, for the people, and it should be of the people of Sri Lanka or Nepal or Bangladesh. It is we who make the changes for our future. So us being silent will not bring any changes. So we know what we wanted. We needed reforms. We needed hard hitting policy reforms that would work, but not give us an illusion of work that is being done by the government. We don't want false hopes and promises. We knew what we wanted and we were after it. So the first thing was to build our economy back, because if you take Sri Lanka, we have every single 5 year we elect a new president. the president who comes in might not be able to successfully implement his manifesto or the mandate for the people. And then we have to elect a new president, and they will start from scratch. So it was like we were living in a loophole. We were not seeing any proper reforms. So we needed, the first thing was to build our economy, which we are currently doing right now with the newly elected president, who is actually doing significant changes. And the first thing is we needed someone to listen to the youth, because often the youth were considered invisible. They were not welcome into different agendas, or were their voices heard on policy matters. So it's very interesting to see how it was, the president right now is actually working very closely with the youth. And we are doing a lot to have a sustainable development for the youth, because our entire generation is to create the next generation leaders and pipeline generation in Sri Lanka. So we are doing a lot of changes. Our rupee is also increasing day by day, though there are some depletions. And we also have scholars in academia. We have entrepreneur innovation and business development that's being grown in Sri Lanka. And though this was not the situation how Sri Lanka was before, we had to depend on other countries. So we were on the dependency theory. To now, we are actually doing the Sri Lanka first flourishing theory. And that was also from the new breadth and initiatives that's coming from the government that we have right now. So we could say that we had a lot of challenges, but it was the very challenges that actually made us to grow better in the future. So we took all our challenges to build our future platform. So that was something that I would say is what we're doing right now in Sri Lanka. And we can say a lot of positive goodness can happen, because it's just 2 years from the new government has been elected. So we're yet to see more of their transformation, and we are being hopeful for sure.
It's great to know about the context. I mean, you rightly brought up the famous quotation, the Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, the quotation by the people, for the people, of the people. A few years back, I had heard it from a professor somewhere in India, if I was not wrong, and then he was just mentioning it in a humorous manner that nowadays it has been translated like by the people, not it is by the people, and then for the people, no, for the people, they get far from the people.
Yeah.
And then of the people, switch off your phone after you are elected. So this is what actually is happening in our context. He was rightly getting a humor, but I was kind of thinking that is what that was what actually happening in our context, and that's how these protests happen to bring changes. I think it is really important for us to understand that the government, when we talk about democracy, governments should be responsible towards people. And the main space that we seek for a thriving democracy, for a lively democracy, that is the great civic space that we have. I mean, one of the contexts that Shafi was bringing, and I would really be happy to hear more about the context of Bangladesh. What is the situation of minorities? In Nepal, I would say after the protest happened, I don't know the news were wrong or not, because we have been bombarded with a lot of misinformation these days in this digital age as well. I mean, the minority situation was somehow uh, in the media was not very favorable. That's what we were actually sensing of. I mean, how it is actually going in the context of Bangladesh as well. I mean, I would be really happy to know about the context, especially because I know one of the contexts in Bangladesh, because in my experience when I was I mean, there is a strong, there was a draft bill prepared by your previous government known as the equality bill. That is a comprehensive anti-discrimination bill that was actually in the parliament. The government collapsed, the parliament collapsed, and the process was also lapsed. In that situation, I don't know how the government is now taking it. I mean, there were some reformation process at least was going on in the previous government as well. How it has been seen now, especially in the context of minorities and disadvantaged group as well.
So, okay. So, if I specifically mention about the group of minorities, so I need to clarify this, like what minorities we are talking about. So, minorities, it comes in terms of religion, it comes in terms of location, it comes in terms of gender. So, if we look at our parliament or current political practices, minorities inclusiveness, we are hopeful that we will be more inclusive, but it's optimistic that in our current parliament we have our youth ministers, youth MPs engaged. So back in Hasina government or previous government regime, if we talk about youth inclusion, we don't find much about it. Youth voices were marginalized. So in that case, we also can say it's also a part of minority. Like youth voices are not heard, their demands are not met. So throughout this July movement, this space has been created. Now young people are talking much about their needs. They are presenting their demands throughout social media. You can say like, yeah, social media is a good factor during the movement and also after the movement. So about the inclusiveness, I think we are optimistic that yeah, government is being more inclusive than the previous governments, but particularly if you say minorities, like about women or transgender community, queer community, or religious minority, in that case we have to lot to do.
Thanks. Yeah, please. Yes.
I'm just adding to that note. There was a report that after the July Revolution, that including some international media, I'm not pointing to any country, some international media was presenting Bangladesh as if the lot of minorities, as being minorities, are being affected. If you see the report of the Netro News, so after the July Revolution, the Awami League People's House have been affected. It is not because of their minority, it is because of their political affiliation. So there is a clear difference. Like if a Hindu's house is burned down, it does not mean that for being a Hindu his house was affected. So in most of the cases, some minority people's house were affected after the July Revolution. That's not the reason that he was a Hindu, he was a Buddhist. The reason is that he was a Awami League member of the parliament or something like that. So is this the only the Hindu minorities houses have been burned down? The question is no. Even if you see the percentage, the Muslim houses, if you look through that angle, so even the Muslim houses have been mostly affected. This is one of the reasons that some media have highlighted them as the minority member of the minority community. But this is not the case. The case is they are the party members. So this is one of the reasons. Second reason, just giving you a comparative study to understand the situation. Since the Dr. Yunus take charge of the government, more than 97 attacks has been. I mean, even the Muslim minorities. You know who are they? They are the traditional syncretistic Muslims, the Sufi Muslims. They have been affected. It's not the Hindus. It's the Sufi Muslims, because there is a division. I mean, a kind of sectarian conflict, like the Wahhabi, Salafi group, or whatever you call them, the Puritan group. They don't like the ideology of the traditional Bengalized follower of Bengalized Muslims. That they have different sort of belief system. So I mean, it's not only the inter interfaith problem. The problem is mostly with the intrafaith within the Muslim community. And I must confess that yes, to some extent there are also the conspiracy theories that some wants to play with the minority card. So those sort of things are there. But yes, our country has a long way to go to ensure the communal harmony, and especially the protect the minority rights. And as a member of the Muslim community, I do believe that it is the duty. It is not only the duty of the government, And being a part of the Majoritarian community, it is our duty also to protect our minority brothers and sisters in their worship places. And I did the same job immediately after the July Revolution.
Great, Aryan.
On 5th of August, I actually, even there was no government for 3 days, 5, 6, 7. There was no government. Yunus took charge on 8. So what we did, I formed a big community with the students, and we tried to protect minority
Good to know.
places,
Yeah.
and then even the university adjacent area. So yes, even if it is not me, even the religious political parties like Jamaat Islami, like Islami Andolan Bangladesh, they also protected the minorities, and so that sort of spirit are out there. But you have to build a culture. That's what I'm saying. Still a way to go to protect their rights, so that nobody can play with these minority cards. So it's as a being member of the Majoritarian community, it's our duty too to protect them.
Good. Yeah, indeed, it's the responsibility of the state, community, and everyone to protect the rights of the minority. Well, we'll be discussing about it later on as well, but just want to refocus on the idea of civic space. And one of the topics that I really wanted to bring out on the context of freedom of organization, like in the context of Nepal, we can see that there was a strong civil society movement in Nepal. These days, I am not, especially in my personal observation, I don't see that much a strong civil society. I think there are a lot of factors as well, but there was some things that were already done by the previous government. It is also the result of that. I personally believe that after this government, the government should actually take initiatives to thrive the civil society in Nepal so that it can actually contribute towards really stabilizing democracy in Nepal, especially in our context. Really wanted to understand about how is the situation in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, especially in the context of freedom of organizations. For an example, in the context of Bangladesh, there are some great civil society organizations I know that they have been working on, but I also see that a lot of civil society organizations, they face a lot of issues. I understand that the NGO bureau registration is one of the hardest things done by any NGO in Bangladesh. After this government, is that being reformed or not? How is the situation of civil society organizations, how they are contributing, especially in the sector when we talk about non-government sector as well? I think, anything that if you or you want to add, will be really, I think it will be really contextual to analyze, especially in the context when there is a new government.
So, okay, so thank you for mentioning this topic. Like for the civil society organizations, yeah, they are very actively protecting and supporting the movement and the youth inclusiveness, the minority rights, they are doing from the very beginning. And if you say, like, after the reformation, not only reformation, the revolution and the newly elected government, yeah, their space have been shrinked in some cases. Maybe it's for some external forces or might be from internal forces. We are not certain about it, but their space has been shrinked. That's true. But they are working on their own way. They are supporting those who were taking part in the movement, and now those who need, like, during the movement, it was very interesting. Like, if I mention, like, university teachers, they stood for their students. That was really interesting because at that time nobody was like supporting students very actively. They had some fear. People had fear, like, what will it be? It's just student movement, leave it, this kind of things. But at that time, university teachers, their groups, they stood for the students. They negotiated with the police, negotiated with the military, and protected their students' right. And at the same way, the civil society organizations or NGOs, they are also protecting their rights. So, yeah.
Great. I think there are similar contexts in the context of Sri Lanka as well. And as we understand that, it is not only limited to the non-government organizations, but it is also like, for an example, take example of how are the professors? How are the think tanks? Are they being attacked or not? In situations we see in an oppressive regime, in an abstract obstructed world, what we see is think tanks are attacked, NGOs are attacked, medias are attacked, and that's how democracies are weakened. And that is not the beauty of democracy. All those things that we are discussing today should be stabilized. They should actually be strongest. That's how the democracy will be stronger. And so I think, I mean, as I mentioned, if I'm not wrong, that it's been 4 years of your movement, and then how it actually is in these 4 years, how, what, I won't say a parameter, but what is the level of development that you see, especially in the context of these civic spaces? Are they are really thriving, or they are being weakened, or being stronger? I mean, yeah, I'm really less knowledgeable in the context of Sri Lanka. Sorry for it.
Yes, to bring a good perspective and to answer your previous question, if you take Sri Lanka's protest, everyone was included in it. There was a great representation of all the minority communities as well, although some were not welcome, some who did not participate as well. But we had the NGOs and civil societies that did back everybody to be there. So we had, religious communities who had their own organizations because they wanted to promote interfaith. Although you correctly mentioned, we did have struggles, although we had an entire fully fledged lawyers association who would be at the protest zones, who would just sign bail and hand it over to those who got arrested at the protest site. So they already had a bail so that they can come out of it. We had doctors and professionals who would be at the protest site to treat those who got injured, whether it was holding a very extremely hot tear canister, and if your hands were burned, or if you got assaulted by a law enforcement officer, there was a team of dedicated doctors and professionals from the Red Cross Society as well, and from the local practitioners, and doctors were always there, nurses were there, and we had teachers and professionals and academics who would come and teach university students or anyone who was interested to learn more about democracy at the protest site. So we also turned the protest site into a part-time university ground. So people would come and learn and listen, and they would come, volunteering their time. And we had, different entrepreneurs who would, donate food. And we had like a community kitchen where people had breakfast, lunch, and dinner while they were camping out at the protest sites. So we had different people to sort of like help, and it was a very inclusive and included environment. But we go back to your question saying it was challenged, it was attacked by many people, and people would try to hijack it, people were trying to prevent it. There were, a lot of challenges and difficulties for us to even like continue and sustain and keep this momentum. So people would, deliberately attack us from, stopping us from doing all of these activities. And that is when we have to, think about, we needed this political space to flourish and sustain. And we had all of these problems. So if you ask me if there was an Aragalaya today, would these people come and support us today? The answer would be no, unfortunately, because it came with great responsibility, came with great challenges for us. So it was a life lesson learned. And I don't know if Sri Lanka would have some similar protest zone as functioning as it was in 2022. But 4 years after, we don't even see people coming out saying, oh, I actively participated in the protest, because many of them got arrested under different laws on the PTA, which was called the Prevention of Terrorism Act, because it was considered to be an act of against state to protest. So many people were in hiding. They would not actively say that I was an activist, as we would proudly claim that we were taking the democracy in the right way. Not many people came because they were subjected to harsh penalties. They were taken to police stations for inquiries, and these inquiries would last for like 9 to 6 months. And because of these, people would just take a back seat. And once that was beautifully known as participatory democracy is now being known as a closet democracy. That is a part of some people's opinion that I had interviewed personally and have witnessed. But we also have some people who are still thriving, and they do no matter what to make sure democracy is being spread in the right way. So we have people who do put their life online to make sure democracy is the only thing that is sustaining and going in the right direction. So we have people who do checks and balances very strongly, and we also have the other half who are afraid to come out into society to say and claim that I was a part of the Aragalia. So we have a mix of both, the best of both worlds, I would say. Like, they have to protect their identity, but they also have to say that I am the new face of democracy, and we can do a lot of things if you join forces with me. So we have two different opinions, I would say.
Great. Well, thanks for bringing that out. I mean, one thing that I just wanted to actually elaborate in the context of civic space is, after all, we had movements, we had elections, we have now governments. Things have been settled, and now is the situation. I mean, I just wanted to have a very, like, 2 3 line on a very situation, that how do you see from civic space. For an example, how I see now in the context of Nepal, because we also had the similar situation. If I see it from freedom of peaceful assembly, I see the situation is almost similar. The people who were actually protesting at one point, like we have a point called Maitigar Mandala, where people go and protest if they have any issue. People are still there. So I don't see that that has been improved a lot or that has been weakened. Government is not controlling them, is not telling that you are not allowed to do protest here. And I see that people are still protesting on their own issues. That is one of the aspects of civic space. At the same time, I see media is very confusing now. I sometimes see that media, they have been attacked. Sometimes I see that media is also enjoying. So I don't see that much confusion, but it is very confusing. That not much confusion on peaceful assembly, but a lot of confusion on media related issues. I see lawyers are somewhat enjoying their freedom, but not, I mean, the professors, there is great reform going on in the universities of Nepal, so still need to see how much the think tanks are being attacked or the universities are being attacked. I mean, from that perspective, I just want to understand about Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, how these groups, I mean, so for an example, let's take an example, is the government is actually banning people to do protest or not in the regular places like that. Are they really telling that you do protest on this matter but don't do protest in this matter? I mean, there are sometimes we see the situation, you speak anything but you don't speak about the religion. No, in democracy we can speak. If I am being oppressed just because of I am being mistreated, or if I am being discriminated on the basis of my identity or my religion, then I should have the right to speak against of it. That's why I think this should be, I mean, this should be, these rights have been rightly guaranteed in a good democratic situation. So just wanted to understand in short about how is the situation like about peaceful assembly, like media, lawyers, academics, are they really being, are they really enjoying the freedom or not? Safi, back to you.
Very short answer should be, in South Asian countries, things does not happen always in the way that the authoritarian states usually happened. Let me give you an example. It's not something you were just the authoritarian president is telling you to do this. Sometimes, as our institutions are in the process of becoming basically an institution, they show their legitimacy, they show their allegiance to the leader. The leader is not asking him to behave in a certain way, but the people, those who are in place, they are behaving in a certain way. So the self censorship is there. So in order to understand that dynamics, you have to see how the institutions are formed, who are being employed there, and especially if you look at Bangladesh, like all the institutions is appointed by the political parties' obedience. It's not the proper people are being picked up and then they're being put in place. Is the who are they? They're the political parties people. Look at the universities, look at the different business organizations, look at the banks, look at every organizations, look at the whatever the institutions we have. Everywhere, if you don't have the political affiliation, the sort of hidden or the or the very I mean a kind of relationship, open relationship, is very difficult to get appointed there. So from that perspective, uh, I think that civic space is a kind of managed. I should not say the shrinking or self-censored. I think it is at the state of self-censorship. I am not speaking because I am fearing of losing my position. So I think that sort of self-censorship is happening in Bangladesh currently, because the government is just a few months old, and I don't think the government is has any.
In my personal point of view, Safi, if someone is doing like that, self censorship, that is also one of the oppressive sign of the government. That
No,
person
it
is
is
being
because if you
feared. Okay,
no,
so I mean that's what I can see
no,
in
it's
the
not
context
because
of
of the
yeah.
fear.
Mhm.
It's not the because of fear that they will oppress you. It is the fear of losing your position. You know, two different things. So I am placed in some places, so that it is assumed, it is taken for granted that you will not say anything that goes against the.
Grateful if you could just add on the similar thing about Bangladesh as well. Like these species are how they are operating, especially after these movements and all. I mean, one of the great aspects that he actually brought is people are self-censoring themselves, not only just because the state is like repressive or something, but they are kind of fearing
To
that
get
they will lose
benefited.
there or they will not be benefited from the state benefits. That's what. But I think in a wider sense, how do you see our media being attacked, think tanks, NGOs, like like in the small places where people go protest? How is the situation of protest? For let's take an example. How is that now?
If I say the government, the state is not directly pushing you, directly saying you that you cannot do protest, you cannot do assembly. They're not directly saying this, but there's been some environment, there's been some indirect forces, I would say, that restrict you, that restrict me as well, like to express myself, express my raw self, what I want from the state, what I really need, what kind of security I need, what is government failing to provide me. Yes, I do fear. So that's true that government is not forcing anyone, government is not directly pushing like, yeah, you cannot do protest. But yeah, there's been some situations, some causes for which people are really afraid of. So if you see, like after the movement, the after the July movement, mob violence became very popular. I mean, in sense of negativity. So people have fear of their life. They have every fear every day, like they can have been attacked if they express any different point of view. So yeah, in that case, in that way, civic space, yeah, it's been shrinked, I would say.
So in Sri Lanka, we actually had something called an agitation site or an agitation place where people were allowed to make peaceful protests. So it says that we can make protests as long as it is peaceful. So us Sri Lankans, we took peaceful by, making art, by having music, by having, a stage where people can just come and talk about whatever they believe in democracy. So the freedom of speech was there until it was curtailed by media censorship. And yes, we did. And during the Aragalia protest time, so we did have like governments and law enforcement officers coming and stopping us. So we also had this very humorous incident is while we were protesting, the government set up huge loudspeakers to shut the voice of the people who were protesting. So that kind of a dynamic and struggle was also there because they did not, because they were trying to disrupt, but we remained peaceful. So the whole idea was to have peaceful protests. And if you take about our research think tanks and media, so some media bias towards the government would not be allowed to sort of make any comments. So they have to sort of curate and tailor make their, news readings for that day so that it doesn't look like we are trying to say that the democracy is backsliding or there's any backlashes to the community or the government, but rather to say that the government is fixing but not showing the real magnitude of the grievances. Whereas there were research think tanks that went too very direct to address the situations of the people because it needed to be transparent. And we were also afraid of, spiraling into, what Ananya just mentioned, mob violence, because Sri Lanka was very well known for a small protest turning into a little bit violent at a point. And we did have instances where it was going violent, but then we had to steer it and tune it back to, peaceful protest, because that was our only condition is have protest, but make sure it's peaceful. So we came back to the peaceful way, and that was our stance of camping out in front of the old parliament as well as the president's palace so that we get an answer. But the minute the government started to use forces on the peaceful protesters, then it sort of outbroke. And we wanted to show that enough was enough and that the people needed their answers and that we had our struggles in that as well. So we had an agitation site. The only condition was make it peaceful. But then they were the ones to sort of like the then government, the Rajapaksa government was the ones to attack us first. So
No, I
we
mean,
wanted to make
just
sure
understand,
it's
how is
peaceful.
that now?
How is it now?
Just comparison, like back in 2021 there were a lot of people doing creative protests, peaceful protests, as you shared. These days, how do you see the number has been increased, similar movements, or what? I mean, in every democratic state, no state is very fulfilled, no state is very democratic. I mean, there are a lot of issues. That's why there will be a lot of protests as well on the side. How do you see now? There were a lot of protests before, or these days much? I mean, how that has been really shrinked, or that has been more expanded?
Absolutely strict to your point that you correctly mentioned, because back then people were all on the streets, but now they're all keyboard superheroes. They're doing, Twitter posts, they have hashtags, and even if they are making a post, they make sure that they use VPN so that the origins are not tracked because they don't want to be labeled saying it was this particular person who is in charge of this particular art that is being circulated to spread, awareness. So it's been shrinked because we do have fear of being, arrested for using our voices correctly.
Unfortunately, this is one of the aspects that we see in the context of the world that is actually a sign of a repressive government taking over. Anyway, we are almost at the end of conference, but just one thing that I just wanted to discuss really is when we talk about civic space, and particularly this time when we discuss the great space within civic space is the digital space. And how do you see the digital space, especially in the context of Nepal? I see that, I mean, social media actually in digital space have been so strong platform where people are expressing their views, a lot of things that is actually helping a lot of people to understand the issues and a lot of things. But at the same time, it has also been a platform which is providing a lot of misinformation to the people, which is actually digressing the real values of democracy and other things into a negative sense. At the same time, AI generated propaganda, these all things are actually so much manipulating the real issues that we see actually is harming the foundation of democracy in our context as well. However, it is also a great platform which, if used so greatly, can actually bring a lot of change. Even in the context of Nepal, we can see it was actually the Gen Z protest was actually started when there was ban on social media in Nepal, and the youth of Nepal, Gen Z of Nepal, they started the protest. I mean, how strong it is now. We can see that you cannot actually challenge social media. So this has been platform, but at the same time, this is also bringing a lot of manipulations, propaganda, and a lot of things. How it is actually affecting or somehow contributing in the context of democracy. Why don't we give a short opinions on it? I would say not opinion, but you maybe your personal observation, especially in our context, and then we'll wrap up.
For social media, I would say, yeah, social media was a very active agent, I would say, for the Gen Z movement. But what happened after the movement, we can see, like, if we look at women, they have been victim of digital violence, in cyberbullying, sexual harassment in digital space. So if we see, like, let's say I have posted something against the government or about my right or something like that. But in real life, I have been attacked. I have been harassed. I have been threatened for sexual violence. My family has been threatened. So on the next day, I won't have that courage to post on social media. So this is how social media is working now. So and yeah, it was definitely an active force, and also now it can be an active force if similar movement happens or in daily life, regular life. Yes, it is, but the point is whether I can speak and whether I will be secured. So in that concern, I think we are not using social media to protest or to express ourselves so much.
Thanks. I mean, digital harassment has been one of the greatest issues of this time. Luga.
So digital deepfake is actually one of the most biggest challenge because it's very difficult for us to tell whether this is the truth and whether this is false. In order for that, we need to know the actual truth because misinformation is different, and it's very difficult for us to spot the right answers. And because of this, many people have fallen into the trap of believing this is the reality, and because of that people have gotten all confused, and because of confusion it leads to bad results in the after end. People would just start coming out to the streets and then protesting. We don't know how it would go, but in when you take the digital space, in first we have in Sri Lanka, we use the social media in such a way that the information is consumed in a right way. So we used to have Twitter only for public discourse. We would have WhatsApp to sort of organize, grassroots organizations. The YouTube and TikTok and Instagram was used to sort of like motivate the youth people because of all these, reels and short video content. So I believe like how we wanted to give information was consumed, but then we also have this issue where not many people are using the platforms correctly. So information is being, consumed in other ways, and it's not being directed to the right audience. So that is also one issue that we have to talk about is we have information, we have awareness platforms, but it is not being reached to the right people. Sometimes it be rural areas. It's just the city who knows a lot about these details, but the larger population of Sri Lanka is being left out. So we have digital marginalization and the misinformation, as I also mentioned, are two different issues that is sort of like helping to shrink the space. But if it was used correctly, as you mentioned, could be promoted as a very important tool to have participatory democracy for a lifetime. So that is my opinion about it.
Grateful, Safi, if you can add your observation, especially on this topic. And
I mean, I think is now the digital space is more valuable than the actual real space. If you see the Gen Z, they're sitting side by side, but they're on their phone. They're not making friends who is sitting beside, but he's making friends who he doesn't know. So, and also it is itself as a big world. So there is a misinformation, disinformation, and there is a competition over it. That who can control the narrative by controlling the digital spaces. And I think most of the political parties right now, they have their dedicated branch to do those sort of things in favor of them, to dehumanizing the opposition, to look themselves good. So this sort of strategies are, I think, out there. So yes, this platform have been used in multiple cases to attack minorities, to attack different peoples. Yes, in future this is going to be a challenge for government, for state actors, for non-state actors to control, and ultimately the group will win who will have the control over the digital spaces. And we have already seen that during those Gen Z uprisings, government did not have control over the social media, so that's why it succeeded. So it succeeds. So
Thanks a lot, Safi. And it was really a wonderful discussion on a very timely context of shrinking civic space in South Asia. Nepal Center for Contemporary Studies would like to thank all our guest speakers today. Thank you, Safi. Thank you, Luga, and thank you, Ananya, for your valuable opinions and also sharing about your observations of your own respective countries. With this, we will wrap up this event and thank you once again. Namaste.